All right, let's get started. Well, welcome all everyone. Welcome to this beautiful, warm Friday afternoon. Welcome to our second event of our Women Leaders in Technology interview series presented by Stevens Leadership Portal. My name is Wei Zheng, Associate Professor of Management and Richard R. Rossi Chair in Leadership. Our Stevens Leadership Portal is a new initiative at the School of Business to connect people to leader stories, cutting edge research, and learning communities through a web-based knowledge portal. You can see our experimental site in my background. We want to provide you fresh perspectives to tackle the problems at the intersections of leadership, technology, and inclusivity. Our web portal is targeted to go live next month. So as part of an effort for this portal, we're organizing a live interview series this semester featuring 6 top-level women leaders in technology. So it is my great pleasure now to have a conversation with one of the School of Business star alumni, Joelle Rusin. Joelle earned her bachelor's degree in business and technology from the School of Business in 2012. She's currently a lead change manager at Duke Energy. She has also worked at a very diverse set of organizations such as JP Morgan, Major League Baseball, McGraw-Hill, SelectMinds, and Avanade. Welcome, Joelle.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. And really, thank you for doing this. I'm so excited that Stevens is doing something like this. I wish something like this existed when I was there. So this is so important. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Joelle. And by the way, Joelle is having some technical connection issues and she's joining us by audio, but she will try to join us by video toward the Q&A session, right, Joelle?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, I figure we'll hopefully stay connected this way and then we'll give it a whirl during the Q&A.
Sounds good. Wonderful. Thank you so much for being willing to spend your time with us. I think a lot of us are looking forward to hearing your experience and insight. So during our conversation, I'll be asking most of the questions in the first half, but please feel free to put your questions into the chat in the process, and in the second part, we'll open it up for everybody's questions. I know some of you have already provided excellent questions in your registration forms, and I have incorporated them into my questions. So let's get started. So Joelle, could you start by telling us what got you interested in technology? How did you get interested in it?
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly, the idea of integrating technology into my college experience really only came to mind from the Stevens Business and Technology major. At the time, I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go to college. I always enjoyed my jobs in high school and working, and I did really well at my jobs. I thought business was a good place for me to land, and technology was the differentiator at the time. And in hindsight, I'm extremely glad that I went that route, because in today's tech landscape, there really is no leadership without technology leadership across industries. So integrating my business major with technology has really helped me to help my customers, at least in my consulting experience, and companies I'm working for, to try not to be so reactive, but rather lead changes through understanding both the business components and technology as well.
Interesting. So on that topic, since your role currently is lead change manager, could you tell us what you really do and what kind of projects, or 1 or 2 important or interesting projects you're working on?
Yeah, so ironically, I'm actually in the process of taking on a new role for a different company, and that is a large insurance company where I'll be there in their IT space under the strategic program organization. So essentially there I'll be leading teams that are implementing large scale technology changes. But currently I lead change at Duke Energy, like you said, on a team called Analytics, Products, and Transformation, which sits under the enterprise data analytics teams. So essentially what we do is we build products and solutions for quote unquote internal customers, so other employees at Duke, with data science at the core. And my role is to lead all change efforts, from aligning closely with our senior leadership stakeholders to raise awareness, to generating buy-in to new solutions and pipeline development, to working with our product teams to understand current state for what our customers are doing, the stakeholder goals, where challenges and resistance will exist in the future, to driving adoption and really figuring out how we can capitalize on return on investment of the solution that we're implementing, which all probably sounds a little bit abstract. So if you want, I can give some examples of some of the things that we're working on right now.
Yes, please. Please go ahead.
Sure. So keep in mind too, that before coming to Duke Energy, I wasn't really familiar at all with the utility industry. And I also wasn't super familiar with data science. So I'm going to break this down for you in terms that I hope everybody can understand. At least I could understand it when I first started. So the first product that I worked on at Duke was for identification of energy loss through energy theft, meter failure, or misconfiguration for both energy and natural gas meters. So when I'm talking about meters, think about it as simple as a meter that sits on the side of your house. That's what we're talking about. So that meter could be misconfigured and you could be losing energy. There's actually instances where people will figure out how to kind of jack the meters and circumvent the way that energy is being run through the meter to make it cost less. And that's an example of energy theft. So really the big problem statement here is that prior to us developing this product and prior to us using data science to identify areas where we think this might be occurring, there really wasn't a standard way to do it. So people were kind of, that were in the field were essentially driving around and identifying things that maybe didn't quite look right. So this product added that element of standardization, and through using this data, we were able to instill, well, really, I guess, just data-driven decision making that wasn't there before. So these were problems that were costing the company time inefficiencies and also leaving millions of dollars on the table every year in lost revenue because of these occurrences. So this, like I mentioned, this product adds the element of the data-driven decision making to recoup that revenue, all while reducing overall costs that were coming out of that guessing game. Another example of a product my team is working on right now is we are rolling out a 10-year granular forecasting product for our forecasting team and for distribution planners that's more interactive than anything that they've had before and allows our end users, so those forecasters, to look at various scenarios to understand forecasting for things like electric vehicles and rooftop PV, which is that's solar, so think like solar panels, or load on our grid in order to increase reliability and customer satisfaction, and then also do things like meet the carbon reduction commitments that Duke Energy has. So those are a few pretty big bucket examples. We also have several big data management solutions that we power through Power BI so that our teams can work with tens of thousands of rows of data more efficiently. And again, all with the purpose of enhancing that data-driven decision making.
That's really helpful. Thank you for sharing those specific examples. It's very helpful.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, given you talked about forecasting, 10-year forecasting. So when we do
Mhm.
forecasting, there's got to be uncertainties, like things like COVID that happens. How does COVID influence utility usage or even IT, or how technology responds or does forecasts in different?
Yeah, I love this question. I absolutely love this question. And I think, in our previous conversation, we talked about how important data is for all companies across all industries. And I think there's actually an article from, I think it was Harvard Business Review, that talks about data really is the number one asset for companies. So when COVID hit, my team was actually asked to help create a dashboard for our senior leadership to be able to forecast and show what we anticipated the impacts of COVID being on our grid. And then beyond that, we were also asked to integrate a lot of like medical data and data from hospitals to determine and predict where we thought locally to our offices there would be hotspots to try to predict a return to work policy and what that would look like. So really, I mean, if nothing else, this pandemic really showed us how important data is, and that no company or industry is resistant or resilient, or resistant to these types of impacts and how important data is.
So talking about resistance, in our prior conversation, you talked about this change strategy rather than change management. So how does that work? So how does change, especially initiated by a technological needs, how does that work, and what kind of resistance there could be, and how do you break those resistance?
Yeah, so I think first let's focus on that question about change strategy versus change management. And I hope that this can help others to realize that a job title can be just that, and that you can transform a role to add value in different ways. So to me, change management is more of a solid textbook methodology. And there's many different brands of change management. I use ProSci, which is a hybrid word for professional science, and it's probably the one with the most brand recognition. Typically, change management has a big ticket goal in mind, like rolling out a product, and is pretty prescriptive in the way that we prepare and support individuals to successfully adopt a change, really all while focusing on the human side of change. To me, change strategy is largely around change and thought leadership, and it's more proactive than reactive, and it seeks out opportunities for improvement. So I was brought on to my current role to stand up the change practice within analytics, products, and transformation. And from my previous experience in IT consulting delivery, I knew that change management was constantly forced to be reactive, since most of the time, change management and the change management team was really an afterthought. IT teams were still trying to understand how to use change management teams effectively, or even understand what change management was responsible for, what value they brought. And so with change management being so reactive, having less time to plan or execute their work, the true value of change management just wasn't being realized across the board. And I wanted a way to blend some of that change management and delivery methodology together, so that we would have our product owners considering change management aspects during their planning and strategizing. So besides developing some of our own methodology through aligning closely with ProSci, and also taking from other experiences and testing out different ideas, we were able to align more closely with our stakeholders and increase satisfaction, which is extremely important in this space, since we're asking people to rally behind really unfamiliar concepts like product development, data science, and changes in their day-to-day that they've really been doing for the past 10, 20, 30, and honestly, occasionally even 40 years in this industry. So essentially, that's what change management does. It looks at the human side of change and prepares and equips potential targeted end users to be able to embrace, adopt, and use that change. The change strategy element is more around how can we really do that effectively. And then I think your second part of the question was around resistance. I mean, there's always resistance. Anytime that you introduce something new, there's always going to be skepticism for some reason. I found resistance is often rooted in fear, just not full understanding of what the change is, what's in it for me, how does this impact me, how do I use it? So within all the different change methodologies, there's a bunch of different tactics to work through that. But I think having that empathy and understanding why your targeted end users might be resistant is really one of the most powerful tools that you can use.
Wonderful. So let me follow that up with one of the participant questions, which is very relevant, which is, for example, we have a specific case, a participant raised, in spite of advanced digital tools with easy self-serve options, clients love Excel for analytics. So in this kind of sort of resistance or this entrenched mindset, how do you break this kind of mindset? If you are in this situation and you need to break it or help them to see the options other tools offer.
Yeah. So whoever sent this question must be on my projects with me, because I mean, we see this all the time. We have this problem all the time. And this is largely a change management issue and problem to solve, but also it definitely relates to the UX, the user experience space, and product design as well. Clients they love Excel, and why do they love Excel so much? It's familiar. They know how to use it. If you can't develop a product that's intuitive enough people are going to want to revert to what they know. If you can't show people how to use the replacement of whatever Excel is, they aren't just going to adapt it themselves. If you can't show more value or the consequences of not changing, they won't change. And it's also an element of understanding what your stakeholder requirements are in the current state, why and how they use Excel today, so that you can factor that in and integrate that into your solution.
Great ideas. Thank you. So sort of showing the values of change or the new tools, and at the same time, the consequences of not changing, what they're going to lose. Great.
Exactly.
Great.
I think the whole what's in it for me concept is always really important to answer when you're talking to stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. But probably understanding why they resist something might be the first step.
Sure. Yep.
Another follow-up question here. If a person wants to get better, improve their strategic planning capability, I guess the change strategy part, if you want to get better at that, what is one or two things that they can do to improve in this area?
In terms of like developing a change strategy?
Developing this, our abilities to help champion or manage change. What is one of the two things they can do?
Yeah, so I think always thinking back to empathy. How is this making end users feel? That's always a really big one. And then I think the other one is kind of thinking about the overall change journey and what that looks like. ProSci offers up a really great acronym that I think about a lot in my field, but also honestly, sometimes in my personal life as well, because I'm that nerdy. But the acronym is ADKAR. So the A stands for awareness, the D stands for desire, the A is the ability, K is knowledge, and then you have reinforcement for the R. So you're constantly thinking about how to make people aware of this change, how to make them want to do this change, and then thinking about how to give them the tools and the ability to actually change. And then once you've kind of hit all of those marks and they're able to do that, people tend to forget about the reinforcement, but to a certain degree, if you're not reinforcing it, you're not building a lasting change. And that's really important to keep in mind.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let's move on to another topic, which is career changes or working in different organizations. What are one participant had the question is, what is the most far out problem you've solved with analytics in different organizations? Or do you have any big epiphanies in your career so far?
Sure. So truthfully, the analytics and data science really only comes into play at Duke. That's really where I've had the most exposure to it. So I think that the forecasting element at a granular level over 10 years is a pretty big deal, especially when you consider how much has and is changing from the actual population and city densities to greener energy options. There's all these new factors that are coming into play. So being able to understand that and incorporate that into our forecasting is pretty amazing. And then also, like I mentioned too, our team was asked to participate in the back to work planning and COVID responses to predict cases locally for our offices and use forecasting that way. I think as far as the biggest epiphany question, the biggest epiphany in my career so far is actually no one really fully knows what they're doing, especially when you're learning something new. It's not about being a born genius. It's about working hard and work ethic and diligence. And especially being younger in my career and oftentimes the only woman in the room in my career, keeping that in mind has really helped me have the courage and the confidence to speak up and ask questions and not be so timid about that.
I would like to follow up on that in a later question about being a woman in the technology space, but let's keep on about the different careers or different experience in different organizations. So you have worked with quite a few or different organizations. What are your strategies of adapting to or learning fast in those when you first enter those organizations? Any particular things you do or skills that help you to learn, adapt to the different organizations?
Yeah. So I think, well, first of all, being consulting has helped me with that a lot, because as a consultant, you're put on different projects in different industries all the time. So I was sort of forced into a lot of these scenarios off the bat. And I think from those experiences, some of my learnings are that change is hard, which is why they have people that are change managers. And it's okay to give yourself some grace during an adjustment period. Don't be afraid of what you don't know. So what I typically do is I'll set a time frame and say, okay, for the first, let's just say 2 weeks, I'm going to accept that I have little to no idea what's going on. And I'm going to use that time to ramp up, observe the current state, and ask questions. And like we just talked about, asking questions can be intimidating. I used to struggle with it and feel almost like I was showing my hand of cards, revealing that I didn't really know anything. It's a really vulnerable place to be as the new person ramping up. But what I've found is, for me, it's easier to find a few allies at the beginning that you can field questions to. But if that doesn't work out, just ask the question. It's better to ask and gain a deeper understanding. It's also possible that no one has asked that question before, and now you're adding value through offering a new, fresh perspective. So after those 2 weeks or those 3 weeks or whatever your goal is, then figure out how to add value and identify some quick wins to work on. I also really encourage people to understand and learn how they operate in uncertain and ambiguous experiences. The more you can learn about how you react to things that are new and different and not fully understood, the more you can hone in on tools to help you adjust in the future. I think kind of something else to note too is, what I kind of call my secret sauce is no secret at all. It's the #1 tool used by corporate America, and that's Google. Everybody uses Google for things that they don't know. So I at least try to get my footing on a topic before going and ask someone a question, where I can try to be a little bit more self-starting and resourceful. I think that Google is the best first stop. So you can gain a general understanding and then ask more thoughtful questions when you're asking someone to take their time away from whatever they're doing. And then I also, like I mentioned before, taking some of the nerves out of a new experience and giving yourself that grace period to absorb and understand, and then figure out where you can add some value quickly. Something to keep in mind is that if you are new to an organization, there's likely already a lot of work in flight and people that have been working on these things for a while. So hopefully, you're coming in ready to be a valued team member and wanting to make suggestions and improvements, but just be mindful about the way you position these recommendations. There's a lot to be said about leading with influence versus telling people they could be more efficient or doing something better point blank. And then, kind of on the note of learning about yourself in new situations, it's also important to know your learning style. I know that the best way that I learn is by doing. There's only so much value I'll gain through ramping up reading documentation. I really prefer to be in meetings, even if it's only listening in, to really get an understanding of what's going on. That answer your question? I feel like that was a lot. Sorry.
Those are wonderful insights. Thank you, especially on the point of being the first few weeks, being vulnerable and having to ask a lot of questions. And that a lot of in my research of women leaders, that is something that especially vulnerable for women, especially in male dominated environments, because they could be seen as not competent or other things. And so how do they keep both vulnerable and competent at the same time? And so you said you Google and you have this build up a good grounding before you go and ask questions. So you're showing your competence and diligence at the same time. You're showing your humility by asking and being open and being vulnerable. So that is a wonderful insight.
I was actually kind of to your note, you brought up, women and asking questions and how that can be a little bit difficult too. I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and she was saying how she really enjoys learning the details of concepts and really digging in and learning how rubber meets the road, and how she was talking to somebody else. And sometimes from the male perspective, they don't need to necessarily get in the weeds as much. They need to be able to generally understand a concept and be able to say it back. And I've found both of us kind of saying, I remember in the past asking a question and a man telling me, no, it's like too complicated. That's a big concept. you don't worry about the details type of things. And I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier about my epiphany, that maybe nobody really does fully know what's going on. And sometimes that answer of, oh, that's a complex concept, don't worry about it, we don't need to know the details, that might not be the case. That might be more, we can generalize it and understand these complicated concepts in an abstract way. But, women tend to really need to know all of the details. They're much more detail oriented. And I'm generalizing, but it was just so interesting to hear one of my colleagues experience that as well.
Yeah, that's true. And in research as well, that women tend to having to prepare more because their credibility and competence are rated or assumed to be lower than men, especially in male dominant areas. And so they need to demonstrate their competency by giving more details and showing more knowledge in order to be treated the same or evaluated as the same in terms of competence as an equivalent man. So that's interesting. So let's delve into this experience of being a woman in technology, especially a young woman in technology. And you mentioned in our prior conversation, sometimes you lead teams of people who are much older than you, probably more industry experience. So how do you present yourself as this trusted leader in this technology space?
Yeah, so I really do look forward to the day when it's not as remarkable to be a woman in STEM, because that would mean that we've made a lot of headway. But unfortunately, today, women still don't quite entirely fit in. Several years ago, I was participating in a 2-week onboarding experience with 30 other people. And out of those 30 people being onboarded to this company, I was one of 2 women. I frequently find myself on teams and in conference rooms, even social team activities or client dinners where I'm the only woman. And that's been happening my entire career, even during my education at Stevens. I think when I was there, the gender split was 70% male and 30% female. So there isn't a flip of the switch solution to increase these numbers. It's going to take time. So in the meantime, I think my philosophy is maybe we can actually turn that whole not fitting in thing into something with a little bit more of a positive connotation, which is to stand out. And I don't mean that I want to stand out just because I'm a woman. I mean, more like if I'm already noticeably different, let me use that notice to my advantage. So I'm going to seek out opportunities to be really good at something and have people relate that like second nature to who I am and make it my brand. And that can be anything. I think it can vary. It can be being a subject matter expert or an excellent communicator with clients, consistency in delivering work, understanding different methodologies, being the go-to person for having a large network and bringing people together. Whatever it is, figuring out how to make it yours and part of your brand will allow you to stand out for something other than being the only woman in the room. And I think one of the most difficult parts of that is actually recognizing your strong suits and learning to tell your story as it develops. So as women, we're so good at believing in others and seeing their capabilities. We push others to grow and recognize their potential, but we forget to kind of do that for ourselves. And learning how to tell your story beyond your resume and being able to showcase your value is up to you. And there's no easy answer. There's no easy way to necessarily do that. But I found that it's a lot about you connecting the dots for someone else versus somebody else connecting the dots for you about you. You have to be able to talk about those things, how much you bring to the table, and then back that up with actions. And an example of that I had was actually fairly recently. I was in an interview, and during the first interview, the interviewer said, "Sell yourself." And I said, "Oh, well, on my resume." And he said, no, I didn't look at your resume. I don't want to hear what's on your resume. Sell yourself. And that was one of those moments where I was so glad that in the past I'd had mentors that had taught me how to tell my story and share it. Because if I didn't know how to do that, I would have been dead in the water on the spot. So I think it's, besides interviews, it's important just to know that.
Wow, that's profound. Could you share with us, how did you answer that question? How did you sell yourself? How is it different from talking about your experience, educational preparation, experience, and is there an angle, is there a perspective you offer that tie up your story together in a way that's appealing to the employer? Particularly in that case, I'm curious, how did you sell yourself? How is it different from reading,
Yes.
summarizing your resume?
Sure. So from my consulting experiences and having to do all these presentations on the fly, I've gotten pretty good at identifying themes. And I'm sure if you go back to your resume and you look at your resume, you're going to be able to extract some themes. So for me, I was able to kind of do three big buckets. I think I said I'm a builder, I'm a problem solver and connector, and I'm a trusted advisor. And then I was able to drill into those themes and give examples of how I'm those things. So I'll just give the builder example, I guess. I really like being at the beginning of something. I like to help develop teams and products and bring ideas to fruition. And I gave that example through one of my first jobs was at a startup company. And actually now on the side, I'm doing freelance consulting for another startup company. And I like to take somebody's vision and help to make it a reality and build that. So that translated really well into that space.
Wonderful. And also in one of our, in relation to this response, you also talked about in our prior conversation, you talked about being this master connector. Could you talk more
Yes.
about that?
Yes, absolutely. So being a bridge builder or a connector is something that I really do enjoy doing. So being in IT, there's a lot of opportunities to notice things occurring in silos. Based on the nature of really, I guess, all of my roles, not only is the project or product I'm on at risk if things are happening in a vacuum, but also the actual work that I'm doing as an individual is at risk. So it's really easy for me to stress to others the importance of communicating and collaborating cross-functionally. I often do take on the role of bringing people together to the table to understand what they're working on and how that impacts other spaces. And then besides project work, one of my mentors early on said something that kind of stuck with me. I was at a company where they were mandating 40 hours of training annually, which was actually really great. I get to on the company's dime. And you could take that time to learn about whatever you wanted. And oftentimes people would travel to training or to a conference, and then they would come back, and that was kind of the end of that. So my mentor said that it would always be so much more valuable at a minimum to share what you learn with your team so that everybody else could learn and grow, and the team could kind of be stronger for it. And it's such an obvious concept, but constantly overlooked. And it's, by employees kind of seen as almost like a busy task. But you can also look at it from the lens of reciprocity and doing business. So your company is paying relatively a decent amount of money for you to go learn something new. You need to really be able to share that knowledge to get a return on that investment. And then I think kind of, along the same theme of being a connector and bridge builder, the last top of mind example I have is that this has really kind of set me apart in consulting. So through being a bridge builder in my internal network, I was able to better understand different functions of the company and truly what different capabilities we had. So at Avanade, I was in the business technology and integration, they call it a skill family. But there also were analytics families and system engineers and much more technical roles than what I had. So I wanted to learn more. I wanted to figure out what they did. And because of that, when I was on a client site, I didn't necessarily always walk the walk, meaning I didn't go heads down and crank out some code or understand the inner workings of cybersecurity, but I could somewhat talk the talk. And I knew a whole network of people that I could connect my client with in order to showcase my company's wide range of capabilities. So a lot of times that would result in us being able to sell more work, which was great for my company, but also for me, because I got to experience that process. And then I got exposure to a lot of people that I might not have otherwise. So when you think about the general concept of connecting people and getting people talking, it's simple, but the upside can be really great.
Wonderful, wonderful advice. Thank you. So there are times when you mentioned coming back to the gender issue. So you mentioned there's sometimes you feel you're discredited or not given adequate credit or maybe unfairly treated. How do you deal with situations like that? Do you call it out? Do you do something? Do you have some self-talk that to help you deal with that?
Yeah. So this is certainly a situation where it is not one size fits all. I think with a question like this, it's important to understand that everyone has a different history, a different perspective, and I think to a certain extent, what I'll call a different pain tolerance. And based on those things, I might not recognize or react in those scenarios the same way that someone else might. So, relating back to my earlier comment about being able to tell your story, sometimes that also acts as armor for me a little bit. When you know what you're really good at, when you know what your goals are, and when you're laser focused on kind of your mission, so to speak, your perspective might be a little different. And it's not so easy to feel discredited because you're standing firmly on a more solid foundation. It helps too to within your network have allies that have witnessed and know your integrity to your work, who can offer guidance if need be. If someone is openly and repeatedly making inappropriate comments or actions, I'll determine the best way to address it if it's bothering me. I also sometimes take the approach to ask myself, is this something that they're doing which is just a reflection of them, or is this actually affecting me? And to be honest, again, this kind of goes back to my experiences and my quote unquote pain tolerance, that I can sit there all day and have someone say completely unreasonable things if I know what I'm saying is fact based. And when it's not, of course, I'll concede, but I have no problem letting someone fly off the handle and have that be a reflection of them while I stay calm and track towards my goals. And that gut check has helped me tremendously in my career. That being said, I do operate under a zero tolerance policy for my teams. And I think that might be because of some of the experience that I had when I was younger in my career. So no one should have to go to a hostile work environment not knowing where the next landmine is that they'll step on. And I actually had a situation a few weeks ago where there was someone really openly talking down to a woman that reports to me, to the point where this person's manager actually, he beat me to the punch and told this guy to calm down on the phone. So afterwards, I talked to his manager and let him know that what we just witnessed was not appropriate behavior. And we pulled him into the conversation as well, and we gave him specific examples. And about a week later, this man was at it again on a rather large call, trying to discredit this person on my team. And she was rightfully extremely upset. We closed out the call early. I looped my manager in. We agreed on an action plan. And we wound up pulling this person's boss and his boss's boss onto a call to let them know that our decision was that we would be pulling our resource, the woman that reports into me, off of their project because their culture did not align with the culture that we were trying to foster. And, we were very practical and kind of methodical in the action that we took. The first time we heard it, we stopped it. We cited those specific examples, letting him know that that was not behavior that we would condone. And then when it went wrong again, there was no surprise to anybody. They knew that there would be consequences. And I think something else that was really important was we owned the response instead of waiting for somebody else to own it. We said, this is the action that we're going to take. And as it turns out, this person actually had a track record of inappropriate behavior, and he turned out to be removed from the project. They asked for my resource to stay. So that's more of an example of when things get heated. But I think in general, as hard as it might be sometimes, taking a step back and trying your best to be logical, but don't confuse that with suppressing something that's really affecting you, is important.
Wow. Thank you for this very specific suggestions and principles to follow. Also in our prior conversation, you also mentioned you ask yourself, what do I want to get out of this conversation? Like keep your focus on the purpose of an interaction and keep your own and take care or own your own response. I love that. Thank you. Let's move on. What's the best advice you've ever received? What's the worst advice you've ever received? And what's the advice you give the most? And how do you sort through good versus bad advice from a variety of people?
That's a good question.
A lot of questions.
I know. So I know the worst advice that I ever received. And that was when I was an intern. It was during my final review at the end of one of my internships with a senior vice president of the group. And she was praising me for the work that I did. There was a lot of great feedback. And the last thing that she said to me actually had nothing to do with my work. She told me, watch your laugh. She said that if I wanted to be taken seriously in a male dominated industry, I had to watch my laugh. Which is something I mean, now, there's this whole concept about bringing your whole self to work. And I do tend to laugh a lot. I'm a little bit more lighthearted. And, that's part of my personality. That's who I am and how I like to work. So at a young age, I mean, I was an intern. That really affected me. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how do I go to work and just not be myself? How do I be so serious at work? So about a month ago, I had my annual review with my current manager. And at one point, we got talking about the team as a whole and the culture, kind of where we want to go and how to grow it strategically. And he said to me, I miss being in the office and talking to people, and I miss being in the office and hearing you bust out laughing in a conference room. That's the kind of person I want on my team, and that's the kind of culture I want. And I'm sure he had no idea the impact that actually had on me, but it made me really realize that advice is oftentimes an opinion, and you get to decide whether or not to subscribe. There will be feedback and advice that stings and it hurts, but it's legitimate. And sometimes there's going to be feedback that you just plain don't agree with, and that's okay. And so I think some of the best advice, I don't know if I've directly gotten this, but I've experienced it, is to kind of take the parts that you like and are helpful. And I think that the same goes to learning new things, or even like mentorship and coaching and seeing leadership styles you like. You might not agree with everything, but I'm sure that you can identify parts that you like and take them with you and make them your own.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I want to ask one more question, and then I want to open it up to all our participants. You folks have been here, and probably you have other questions you'd like to ask. But my question is, where do you draw energy and knowledge? What do you read, watch, or attend to keep yourself updated with even the technology or the industry where you're working in?
Yeah, I do a lot of reading, actually, and I find authors and thought leaders that I like. And now social media makes it easy to do a little harmless stalking and see who they follow and like to kind of continue to open new avenues for inspiration. I also do like streaming documentaries of inspirational people, but for me, nothing beats reading a good book. And to be honest, I run a lot. I'm what you might call a fair weather runner. I only run when it's 60+ degrees outside. But a lot of times I'll do some sort of guided run through the Nike Run Club app. And they offer some interesting media too through running coaches. Andy Puttingcombe is actually on there too. He's from Headspace. So it's almost like a running meditation, but also just different thoughtful questions to kind of get you thinking differently and offer new perspectives. They'll also interview famous athletes, and those interviews are always really inspirational from more of a leadership perspective.
Wonderful. Actually, related to Headspace, our School of Business actually just subscribe to their service. So all our faculty and students create a free account on it. For those of you who didn't know, please go ahead and ask me for information if you don't find it. So which I think is wonderful. So keep, especially during this COVID times.
Yeah, I really recommend that. I know a lot of my friends and colleagues use that. I actually know a startup founder that listens to that religiously. He loves Headspace. So I can't recommend that enough.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's open it up for our participants. You folks must have other questions in mind. So Yash, could you open up the lines? So maybe you can just speak up, just unmute if you can. If you can't, you can type your questions into the chat box. So so you mentioned allies and friends, and you probably draw some energy and inspiration from them. Who are your people? Who's the community that lifts you up?
Yeah. So I like this question too. I think, and actually this could relate back to the best advice question, because this is a piece of advice that I got probably when I was in high school that I think about often too, which is to surround yourself with 10 good people. And I don't think that just translates into career and work. I think it's also important to find out who those people are in your life, your personal life. So I definitely have worked to figure out who my network is at work, and seek out mentorship. And a lot of times I find indirect, unofficial mentorship is the most powerful mentorship for me. I've had really, really great experiences that way. And then in my personal life, I have a lot of girlfriends that are very ambitious and very talented and way smarter than me. And so, we get together even during COVID, we'll FaceTime and things like that and just catch up and talk about what's going on in each other's spaces and how life is going. And, like I mentioned earlier about talking to one of my colleagues about the way that men learn concepts versus women learn concepts. I mean, you even start to have these one-off conversations about things like that just, again, get you thinking differently and noticing things that you might not otherwise notice. And for the most part, too, those friends that are in my network, in my personal life, we're all in different industries, all doing different things. So you do get a lot of diverse advice and just information and knowledge sharing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We're past the 2 o'clock time. So thank you so much, Joelle. This is such an informative discussion, especially with all the examples and wonderful insights you have shared. I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. And thank you again for doing this. This is wonderful.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for attending and asking really good questions. We do have a few more in our Women Leaders in Technology series. I'm showing it on my screen here. The next one is next week with Ajana Vermulapalli, who's the general manager of IBM. And then in the following weeks, we have other interviews, 4 more interviews. So we'll send the information to your email box as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great weekend.